Hello everyone. Hello. Quieten down please. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the great debate hosted by Woroni, ANUSA and the UC Students Association. Hello as well to all those watching at home, which is not something we get to say very often at Woroni. We are live streaming, so if anyone's uncomfortable with that, please feel free to leave. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people whose land we're meeting on and pay respects to their elders past and present. And some procedural things first. Please put your mobile phones on silent and then feel free to use them to live tweet on the hashtag #TheGreatDebate. We'll be having statements from some of our speakers first, so they'll put forward their positions, and then we'll enter a Q&A style debate. That's when the audience, both online and here, will get to ask the questions. And please don't do so before. Save your questions for then. Please don't disrupt proceedings, as you will be asked to leave. So the 2014 budget handed down by the government outlined the biggest changes to higher education in decades, including but not limited to the lowering of the threshold for help debt repayment, the extension of Commonwealth-supported places to private colleges and TAFEs, and a reduction in funding to universities, charging real interest on help debt capped at 6%, and of course the full deregulation of university fees. Since they were announced, there's been a lot of discussion not only about the nature of the changes themselves, but when they'll be taking effect and whether they constitute broken promises, and also if they'll make it through a Senate that is going to be very difficult to navigate for the government. So I'll now introduce our panel. First speaking is Professor Stephen Parker, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Canberra, who has been at one end of the spectrum, anti-deregulation, and a very vocal person there. Professor Ian Young, the Vice-Chancellor of the ANU, and also the Chair of the Group of 8, who has been at the other end of the spectrum, a very vocal proponent of fee deregulation. Then we have Senator Kate Lundy, Labor Senator for the ACT, a former Minister of the Labor government, whose party has been highly critical of these changes. Then we have Senator Zed Seselja, the Liberal Senator for the ACT, and I imagine he supports his government's budget. Then we have Professor Bruce Chapman, the architect of the HEX system, a Professor of Public Policy at the ANU, and the Director of Policy Impact at the ANU's Crawford School. We also have Professor Phil Lewis, economist from the University of Canberra, and we have Cam Wilson, President of the ANU Students Association. So it's a big panel, and I'm sure everyone has some fantastic things to say. So if I might ask Professor Stephen Parker to come and make his statement first.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I won't beat about the bush. I oppose fee deregulation in itself and when coupled with other reforms now being proposed. On average, universities will need to increase student contributions by about 30% from where they are now, just to compensate for the Commonwealth reductions to course costs, that is, just to stand still. So expect a 30% increase anyway. But on top of that, the only upper limit to student contributions will be the international student fee level. I understand this was Ian Young's proposal, and with respect, it is entirely irrational of itself, being exposed to currency and world market considerations. And anyway, where a university models that it would gain more in domestic fees than it loses in international fees, it will just put its international fees up to give it more headroom to gouge Australian students. Now comes the real kicker. HEX, or help debts, on these higher fees will be subject to a lower repayment threshold and a real interest rate, which compounds even when the student or graduate isn't in employment. In fact, it's the combination of all of these components that makes this the worst piece of policy I've seen in Australia in my 26 years here, and certainly in my 7 years as Vice-Chancellor, during which there have been 7 education ministers, unless I've forgotten one or two of them. In summary, As I will explain, these changes taken together are unfair, unethical, reckless, poor economic policy, contrary to the international evidence, and being woefully explained, raising suspicions about how much thought has actually gone into them. First, they are unfair generally because of the level of indebtedness all students might now face, but particularly unfair on the disadvantaged, on women, and on those who take career breaks or go overseas. The disadvantaged don't have parents who can pay off or reduce their HECS debt as the student goes along. Women are particularly disadvantaged, as shown by Rebecca Cassells in the conversation today. These reforms are unethical. Nothing can ever stay the same, but it is unethical for a generation of leaders who largely went through university free or with much lower student contribution levels to impose this amount of hike on the generations behind them. 14 of the 19 cabinet ministers studied law or business at university, and 10 went to what are now Group of 8 universities. If a combined law degree goes up by 50%, which is at the lower end of predictions, then under these changes, it would have taken 23 years to repay the HECS debt had they gone on to average earnings. Joe Hockey and Christopher Pyne would only have repaid their debts a couple of years ago. These reforms are reckless. The worst aspect doesn't stem from the Kemp-Norton report, but from lobbying by the Group of 8. Even the Commission of Audit recommended a 12-month period of debate about fee deregulation. Simon Marginson, one of Australia's leading higher education scholars, has written that no government anywhere in the world has introduced a full-blown capitalist market in higher education, despite 3 decades of talking about it, because they realised the public good component of education would be destroyed. And that's because they have thought about it. This government hasn't thought about it. Fee deregulation is poor economic policy, particularly from a Conservative government's perspective. Recent US research from Penn State University has found a significant negative correlation between changes in student loan debt and formation of small businesses. And if anyone had taken time to evaluate fee deregulation, they would see alarming evidence elsewhere. In the UK, which in some ways now has a scheme more favourable to the student than Australia will have, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has recently found that an average school teacher who has no breaks in their career will still not have repaid their debt by their early 50s. In the US, student debt has tripled in the last 8 years and now exceeds credit card debt. It was the only kind of debt to keep growing during the GFC because these forces, once unleashed, cannot easily be contained again. The reforms have been poorly explained. I won't use up my 5 minutes on the government's communication ability, but never have I seen such confusion over who is affected and from what date. So, I think the reforms are entirely on the wrong track. The government and the Group of 8 have come up with an ideological solution in search of a problem. We have one of the best university systems in the world, and it's about to be trashed. The taxpayer is invoked regularly by the government, but who actually knows if the taxpayer wants public institutions to be competing with each other like this? Maybe they would prefer public bodies to be differentiating and collaborating. This is... I know, yeah. This has been the experience in Germany, where the government announced this year it would abolish tuition fees. The reforms are on the wrong track, because higher education is an investment in the economy, not a cost to it. And they're on the wrong track because research should not be funded by students. If you want to engage in an arms race with the US and China over top-ranked universities, which this government seems to want, then simply merge the Group of 8 into a single powerhouse institution that would shoot into the top 20. You could call it the Australian National University. And you'd save on 7 vice-chancellors' salaries and leave the rest of us alone. I end with a challenge. The Group of 8, chaired by Ian Young, has put out a media release expressing its unanimous support for deregulating tuition fees. So in the spirit of feisty debating, Ian, tell me now what the ANU's student contributions will rise to in 2016. You have advocated uncapping them. You wanted this change. You've had the most time to think about it. So tell the audience what the ANU contributions will go to in 2016. And if you can't, why not? Thank you.
All right, guys. All right. All right. Okay, guys, please sit down. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There's still more than an hour left, so don't, you know. Professor Ian Young.
Thanks, Fergus. I suspect I might have a tough gig here. 6 months ago, Nobel laureate Brian Schmidt delivered a public lecture at University House. He outlined his vision for ANU. He indicated ANU should be an institution dedicated to offering an education unmatched in Australia and rivalling the best in the world. An education that would match the experience he saw at Harvard, small classes of highly gifted students interacting closely with the best scholars in the world, being tested by their own limits. This education would include a major residential component, enabling education to extend far beyond the classroom. This extraordinary environment would develop a cadre of alumni dedicated to further building this environment. The audience applauded eagerly, and there was enormous excitement about this vision. I, however, was sadly pragmatic. I indicated to Brian that I shared his vision, perhaps a utopia of education. However, this was so far separated from the reality of Australia that surely it was just a pipe dream. The reality for Australia is very different. We have a system which in recent years has expanded rapidly. 130,000 more students over the last 5 years, an expansion of which, I might point out, we should be justifiably proud. As a result, however, the cost has almost doubled over that period and is projected to balloon over the next 5 years. Even the Labor government, which came to power with the slogan of an education revolution, could not sustain this increased burden, and in 2013 was forced to cut deeply into the higher education budget. The challenges of taxpayer support for higher education are long-standing and not limited to one political party. In the period 1996 to the present, the per-student funding levels in 2013 dollars have steadily fallen, 14% over that period, irrespective of which government has been in power. The result? Increasing class sizes, more sessional staff, small enrolment classes closing, ageing facilities. A system stuck on a treadmill of ever-increasing student numbers simply to make the budgets work. This is far from the vision I have for ANU, or indeed the vision Brian Schmidt painted. If we do nothing, the result will be clear: a continued decline into mediocrity. Based on decades of indifference from voters, and hence the governments that they elect, I have little faith that a change will arrive any time soon. As it has been pointed out more than once, and just by Stephen a few moments ago, when I went to university, it was free, or at least someone else paid for it. However, less than 10% of Australians attended university at that time, and very, very few came from poor backgrounds. Today, almost 40% of Australians attend university, a statistic of which, again, we should be proud. In a perfect world, government would fund this expansion at appropriate rate. However, as a sector, We have never been able to convince the electorate that universities are their highest priority for spending. This is why we're here today. The government is proposing to shift some of the burden from the taxpayer to the individual, a very unpopular move, as I'm sure you'll agree, but one I believe is sadly inevitable, if not now, at some point in the future. Government could have done this and fixed the price institutions charge. They did not. They decided to deregulate, and this is something I support. The government package is large and complex. It is a mix of vision for a changing system and pragmatic budget savings. There are elements that are clearly simply there to save money for the overall budget. I suspect there are also elements that will be traded off in the Senate, but only the government knows which. I and the Group of 8 welcome deregulation. It will not deliver Brian Schmidt's utopia of education, but it should stem the continual decline and provide greater choices for students. In addition, this package will provide welcome equity provisions through enhanced scholarships and the funding of pathway programs. Of course, the devil is always in the detail, and this package has a number of elements which, in my view, need to be rethought. These include the proposed interest rate on HECS debts, which has significant equity issues. Secondly, the magnitude of the cut to the Commonwealth contribution and how it's spread across disciplines is deeply problematic. Thirdly, the proposal, as Stephen just outlined, as it now stands, caps the amount which university can charge at the international fee. An institution that decided to indeed charge such a fee would also receive the Commonwealth contribution in addition to that fee. Surely such a position is not morally defensible. Rather, this cap should be the total revenue received by the institution, that is, the Commonwealth component plus the fee component from the student. And this indeed is what Gareth Evans and I originally proposed. If indeed the scheme was modified to this, I believe it would address a number of the issues raised about fee gouging. And finally, the cut to higher degree by research students, an area where there is little, if any, private benefit for study, seems counterproductive in a society which needs greater investment in research, not less. These are not easy questions. There are no easy solutions. To simply say no will entrench a steady decline. The challenge is to land on an outcome which does a number of things. Gets the appropriate balance between public and private contribution, enables Australia to develop a system with real diversity and choice for students, which ensures that entry and success at university is limited only by ability and not one's socio-economic background, and develops a higher education system which can build the social capital and research excellence required for a prosperous and socially just nation. Addressing these issues are the challenges that we and this country face today. Thank you.
Now I'll have Senator Kate Lundy.
Thank you. The Australian Labor Party is the party of universal education. We believe that everyone should have the opportunity to receive a higher education and that the system should be fair, pursue excellence, and help secure the future of the nation by ensuring as many people have access as possible. It's your brain, not your wallet, that should determine both your potential and your opportunity. And that's why we'll be doing all we can to stop this government's attack on higher education, including opposing the legislation when it comes to the Senate. Let me turn to Labor's record. It was in 1973, under Gough Whitlam and the Labor government, that university education was put within reach of ordinary Australians. It was made free. We've heard a little bit tonight about the generation that's benefited from that. When the Hawke government sought to move higher education to a mass system so that many more Australians could attain a degree, we kept it affordable and capped HECS and set HECS at $1,800 for a full degree. Over the Rudd-Gillard government, Labor's support for higher education saw 190,000 additional students in our universities. And we had targets to increase the number of Australians from a disadvantaged background to get a higher education. The government has abandoned these targets and will make it more difficult for people to get there. And this government has always had a different agenda. And in 1996, under John Howard, they increased the cost of HECS by an average of 40% and allowed wealthy, full fee-paying students to jump the queue. Then in 2005, the Howard government's own fee deregulation saw universities able to charge another 25% in fees. In 2007, they rebranded HECS as Commonwealth-supported places, which meant students could only undertake a maximum of 7 years full-time study under HECS. Make no mistake about this, when you hear the words fee deregulation again, it is not some kind of red tape reduction, and it's not about reform. What it is about is this government making savage cuts to education and introducing new costs, a new tax, in the form of interest on loans. And both of these are based on lies and broken promises if you go back to the actual promise that was made at the last election. I'd be fascinated to know how many among you would have still voted Liberal if you had known that this was going to happen. The lie that Tony Abbott has stated leading up to last year's election was this, that they would ensure, and I quote, ensure the continuation of the current arrangements of university funding. On average, there'll be an approximate 33% cut to funding for universities. I won't go into the detail because I think some of the other speakers have already covered it, but it will cut the government's contribution from 60 to 40%, and at no point could this be considered the continuation of current arrangements for university funding. But this isn't the only thing. As you've heard, under the government, Commonwealth funding will be cut in perpetuity by linking its indexation to CPI rather than the Higher Education Grant Index. And this means the funding will be less every year than it would have been without even the cuts. So aside from being based on broken promises, these cuts are also fundamentally inequitable. As a result, university fees will have to rise, we've heard, around 30% just to cover the cuts the government's making. And some universities, like Sydney and Melbourne, estimate that the course fees may rise up to 60% just to cover those cuts. In addition, the government will introduce a new tax on people with HECS help debts, further decreasing their ability to pay them off. And what's even more appalling is that this tax will be charged to existing students who took out loans under the condition that there was no interest on them and that they are only indexed to reflect their present value. This is a fundamental breach of faith. This form of interest will see students paying up to 6% compound interest on their debts. This will hurt students, but it will hurt most those who take breaks from employment and to change future careers or to have children. And unsurprisingly, it's women and those who are on low incomes that will be most affected. Now, I know as a distraction to all of these cuts, the government will try and attack our record. I'd like to set a few things straight. The truth is that under the previous Labor government, we doubled our funding for universities. And as I said before, by 2012, an additional 190 students were able to access higher education because of our reforms. We know, I'd like to challenge Professor Young's statement, our statement before the last election where we would wind back the increases. Universities didn't get a massive cut under Labor leading up to the last election. We had a reduction in the growth of the funding that we were giving them, and we were doing it because we were underpinning the Gonski reforms. Well, we've walked away from that because this government has walked away from the Gonski reforms. Another broken promise. They said they would match us on our commitment to education in this country, and they have walked away from that. Finally, I'd like to say that, here in Canberra, we have an extraordinary community. We are extremely privileged in many respects, and we have some 38,000 people studying here in Canberra. Well, these changes will hurt this city and this region. And I'm one of those people that never got anywhere near a university. I left school when I was 16. I'm incredibly proud of it. And I know not every young person is going to even aspire to go to university. But I will not stand here as your representative and allow our university system to turn into one where your wallet determines your opportunity. Thank you.
Before I get our final two speakers, just a quick update on the tweeting, which is going fantastically. Anna says, Ian Young is very eloquent, point well made in support of deregulation. Jacob White says, a utopia of education for those who can afford it. And Beck Gay says, such applause, many stand, very support. Wow. Such dogue. And I actually think we're now trending, which is, of course, what we're all about these days. Senator Seselja, please come up.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the time this evening to discuss these very important issues. Now, as has already been mentioned, the Coalition Government recently announced the biggest reform package for the higher education system in over 30 years. This was a package that was decided after extensive research and analysis. This package is aimed at making our higher education system the best in the world, making our graduates the best in the world, and making our research and development the best in the world. As an alumnus of ANU, I'm honoured to be back on the campus today addressing you all. I'm encouraged to see so many students actively engaged in their education and the future of their education system. I think it's through forums such as this that we can get some facts on the table and have a good discussion and a good debate. I understand there is a lot of debate and discussion and a lot of criticism about the recent announcements. You don't announce such a substantial reform package and not expect this. I'm here this evening to listen to your views and provide answers where I can. But this is not the end of the engagement. I encourage you all, if you have further questions, to get in contact with me and continue the discussion. Now, the higher education reform package in the 2014-15 budget will build the foundations for achieving a world-leading system. I know that students at the Australian National University and the University of Canberra are not here just to get by. They want to excel and they want to get the best out of their education. Now, we all made a choice when we forewent immediate employment upon leaving high school. We all made a choice that we wanted the opportunity to go further. The reforms open up the opportunity for more people to make that choice, for more people to decide to go on to higher education, and for people to receive a higher quality education in return. Now, by 2018, an additional 80,000 students per year will receive government-supported places in courses of their choice. This includes 48,000 students in diploma, advanced diploma and associate degree courses, and 35,000 additional students undertaking bachelor courses. Students will have more opportunity to choose where they study and what course they undertake. Students undertaking courses at many TAFEs, higher education institutes and private providers will be able to access government-funded places. Universities will be required to put 20% of their additional income into a scholarship fund so that more students from disadvantaged backgrounds can access higher education and deal with some of the barriers that exist right now and will continue to exist for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. I fully reject the premise that the reform package will make it harder for students from lower and middle income families to go to university. We've removed the loan fees for fee help and vet fee help, meaning equal access to loans for all students. This means that students will not pay $1 upfront to access education. In rural and regional areas, students will be able to access more pathways to degrees. It will encourage innovative partnerships, especially in outer metropolitan and regional areas where universities and TAFEs can work together to offer the skills and knowledge that local employers are looking for. There is no doubt that the deregulation of fees at individual institutions will have the ability to increase fees. However, it also means that institutions will have to compete on an open market. Now, there's been significant discussion in the media about potential for fee growth and the effect on disadvantaged students. However, in the UK, when the fee cap almost tripled, it was found after 2 years of implementation that 18-year-olds from disadvantaged areas were 12% more likely to enter higher education than was the case before deregulation. HECS will not have to be paid back until people are earning over $50,000. University graduates, we know, earn on average 75% more than Year 12 school leavers. And we know that people with degrees have an unemployment rate of 3.3% compared to school leavers of 7.8%. Achieving a world-class education system doesn't come without challenges. We must repair the national budget. We cannot leave our children with the ballooning national debt that we've been left by the previous government. We are also at risk of not providing a higher quality education system for our children. We are engaging in an increasingly international world and our universities must be able to compete. Now, there's been a substantial growth in the number of higher education students as a result of the introduction of demand-driven bachelor degree places, which is driving up the cost of higher education to the taxpayer. We must meet these challenges in a way that is both fair and reasonable to both students and the wider community. The reform package that the Coalition Government is undertaking is being done carefully and methodically. We will continue to work with higher education and research sector to develop the details for the implementation of these changes. These reforms are about creating opportunity, world-class education systems and making sure that Australians are not left behind. Thank you for your time.
Our two economists won't be providing statements at the start, but rather providing some expert commentary throughout our debate. So our last speaker, before we enter that debate section, will be Cam Wilson, ANUSA President.
The Australian higher education sector is at a crossroads. Funding for university has been consistently dropping for decades. The federal budget answered this plea with a Faustian twist. More funding for universities, money for equity scholarships and extending HECS helps system to sub-degree places have been welcomed. However, it's come at an extreme cost. Students are going to be paying more than ever before. They're going to be paying more of the cost of their education than ever before. They're going to be paying more than ever before for the privilege of a loan, and they're going to have to start paying it back when they earn less. Fee deregulation has come hand in hand with this attack on higher education funding. Arguments for students contributing to get a higher quality education have morphed into arguments against why they receive that much support in the first place. Arguments about how graduates benefit are at best myopic and at worst very, very cynical. My answer to this challenge is that the merit of higher education is reflected in our ANU's own history as a national institution with responsibilities to the international, the national and the ACT and its surrounding areas. It's the idea that pursuing education isn't a selfish pursuit, but rather it's one that allows us to better serve our community. While a few of the other panellists have spoken about specific changes with the federal budget, and I agree with most, if not all, of the criticisms, I'd like to talk about fee deregulation and how it relates to ANU. Fee deregulation has just been extolled about the solution to how to offer high quality education to anyone who wishes that's not limited by something of funding. However, I believe that fee deregulation has a significant risk of doing the exact opposite. The first instinctive question is, will increased costs stop people from attending university? And while history has shown that increases in student enrolment under the HECS Help scheme has not significantly affected enrolment in universities, we've never seen a change of this magnitude. Modelling from the NTU suggests that a cost of a law degree could increase by as much as 150% to $125,000. So much for not having a degree over $100,000. We also need to consider how this system will affect what students choose to study and where they choose to study. Research has shown that students who face higher debt tend to choose their study in order to pursue higher paying careers. We could see a future of students sacrificing studying what they love or what they think will best contribute to the community in order to pay off their student debt. Of course, there's been issues raised about equity. ANU is already a leader in inequity. We have the lowest participation by low socioeconomic status students. We have the fewest students who are first from their family to attend university, and we have the highest median ATAR, a metric that measures wealth just as well as it measures merit. How will this already underrepresented group at ANU fare under this proposed system? I can tell you it's not going to be good. Research shows that low socioeconomic students have been shown to be averse to taking on debt, and with the group of 8 fees shooting through the roof along with their admission scores, these students will simply not even consider attending the ANU, instead choosing to go elsewhere. Speaking to Ian Young last week, we were told about the new diversity of educational institutions, how we'll have the group of 8 as a research-intensive university and other groups of universities, such as those focused on social outreach. Social outreach universities will exist as one of the places that less privileged students will be able to attend, with significantly less funding and opportunities for those who do attend, proof of a structural reinforcement of classism. The scholarships are a fig leaf offering. Published modelling suggests that 6 of the students who will be able to get by on these new scholarship measures, a number that wouldn't even cover the disadvantaged students, and a far cry from the 70% of students at Harvard who receive some form of aid, what we've been holding up as the gold standard. Additionally, there's issues such as bias of merit scholarships towards wealthier students and flaws in the postcode system to determine equity scholarships. At least with the information on hand, scholarships are not the answer. So, even if we look past these issues, will letting universities into the free market truly ensure a world-class education? A Harvard study, Higher Education, found that students are attracted by the prestige of Harvard rather than the teaching quality, which was in fact found to be poor. So while rankings continue to be dominated by objective aspects such as number of research citations, quality of teaching seems difficult to quantify and to compare, making it very difficult to compete on these things. So we ask, how will the ANU show to its students that they are getting real value for money? Universities will also be tempted and incentivised to deviate from using increased fees to go directly towards improving the educational experience of the student. In fact, significant funding may be poured into other aspects, such as recruiting students to pay fees. A poll of US college admission directors found that 35% of them said their main priority was recruiting full fee-paying students who will not receive financial aid. Universities will be incentivised to pour money into and compete on easily marketable aspects, such as having stadiums or buildings, rather than what the quality of their education is. Overall, the proposal of fee deregulation is troubling and ridiculous, with questionable benefits and significant risks. For some aspects, we're told to look towards the US, hardly a bastion of healthy and accessible education system. But for other aspects, we're told we're entering uncharted territories. In fact, what has underpinned most of these speeches so far is that there's plenty that we don't know. So funnily enough, I'm actually ending on a similar note to Stephen Parker. When I asked Christopher Pine, when I asked Professor Young about whether they would present models on what university fees will be, how they will respond, and how much they will be with scholarships, they declined. We've been told time and time again that we're facing the biggest overhaul in decades to university education that threatens people's access to high quality knowledge. And it seems ironic that we are denied knowledge to even make a decision on the matter. Students, staff, and the community have been asked to join in the debate about the proposed changes to higher education, but we have simply not been properly equipped. I welcome this event tonight and suggestions of forums in the future, but I want to finish by saying that this is not enough.
Thank you. Thanks, Cam, and thank you to everyone who spoke. So we're now going to enter the Q&A style section. So we're going to have some roving mics going around, I believe, and we're also going to be taking questions from Twitter and that we've been emailed. So I might take one straight up for everybody on the panel, but I'll direct it to our 2 economists first because I feel bad there was miscommunication and they thought they were speaking. So it's from Laura Way, and it says, what do you see as the purpose of universities in society? And I might also ask them if there were any glaring assertions in some of those speeches that offend their economic minds. So we'll go to Bruce Chapman first.
Should I stay here?
Yeah, stay there.
So, thank you. Thank you for inviting a couple of economists along. We're not usually very welcome because it's because we're so miserable. Really. I mean, it's often said that the only real advantage of being an economist is you don't have to spend any money on contraceptives. And of course the reason is our personalities are just so horrible that the opportunity just never really arises. I would like to point out that that is certainly not true for Phil Lewis. But back to me. I wanted to say something about this debate, which is not directly on the budget, but it kind of is a bit. And the economics of this matter I've been looking at for a long time. And some of the statements that I hear coming from commentators, some self-interested commentators, dumbfound me about the nature of price competition and economic efficiency in the context of higher education. The thing about mainstream micro-efficiency modelling, when you've got a budget constraint, is that consumers choose between various things and they choose on the basis of price because they've got a limited budget. That is so important because let me explain about why HECS is nothing like that. If you don't earn a lot in the future, in any given period, you pay nothing. The kind of the budget constraint goes away. If you don't earn enough over your lifetime, you pay nothing. It offers what economists call insurance against default from normal loans or insurance about hardship. You never may pay more than 8% of your income on a HECS debt. So the idea that this is really simple economics, let the market work, the basic efficiency issues will drive this system, it will become super duper wonderful, it's really very weird economics. And I'm kind of being very polite when I use the word weird. Weird is a euphemism here. Now that does not mean, I think, that there should not be changes in how much is contributed by the government compared to the student. That's a perfect right of a government to have its will on that, but I don't think it's a useful thing and I don't think it's a credible thing to have the debate dressed up into the efficiency of deregulation. It is essentially a government choice about who should pay. That's the essence of this debate, and the whole idea of the delivery of efficiency is kind of a furphy. In my view. And I'm not saying people are necessarily intentionally doing that. I certainly don't think the Vice-Chancellor is. And what this comes down to is really important because it's about where you want that cap to be. Where that cap is extremely critical to me in this whole debate, because if the cap is really, really high, and let me give you a really, really high one, international student fees, and in the presence of taxpayer subsidies, it can end up being the situation that institutions with a lot of market power and with a HECS debt, a HECS collected debt with insurance capacity, that can be in a situation that leads to students potentially being charged more than the cost of the service, more than the cost of the teaching. And this is a really weird thing for any economist to say, but I think it's about ethics. And I've found myself quite surprised, feeling about a little bit of indignation about the potential for total free markets in a world where the government has a monopoly called the Australian Tax Office, which offers important insurance benefits and then delivers market power to institutions who will probably be forced to use it, not necessarily now, but down the track if the subsidies are withdrawn. I'm not predicting that they will be. So it's a very strange thing for economists to say, you know what this is all about? It's an ethical issue with respect to the use of a government monopoly which offers great protection. That doesn't mean this budget is wrong. It means we have to be really careful about talking about free markets and where that cap actually lies. The idea that the institutions will go up to the cap or near the cap is not just mine in theory from the nature of what HECS is as a student loan mechanism, but it's there in the data. In the United Kingdom, which has got a HECS-type system, the government allowed the institutions to go from £3,000 per full-time student year to £9,000 per full-time student year. 95% of them did it straight away. And why did that happen? Because they knew that this is not a real binding budget constraint. And here's the other point, the students really don't have an option. What are you going to do? You're going to say, well, I didn't really want to go to university, that thing I've been interested in, and this is actually true for most people. University is not a decision made at age 18. 12-year-olds kind of know if they do or do not want to go to university, even if they're not sure what it is. So that's why the price response in the UK was really tiny. And that's why I think in the environment which we have now, the prices predicted will be much higher than the 30% record needed for the pure compensation of taking away the government outlays and taking into account the new indexation rules. Over time, my view is that it will go significantly higher than that and quite close to the international student fees. Whether or not you support that or not, I think is about your view of the equity of the system. I just want to make it clear that the evidence is very strongly consistent with that.
Oh.
Quickly, just one quick point, which, well, you wouldn't let me talk, so I'm going to talk. So, if I can't have 5 minutes formally, let me take 7 informally. But don't worry about Phil, he's not nasty like me. The interest rate issue is really important. When HECS was designed, it was a feature that there would be a real interest subsidy. Why was that there? It's for equity. 30% of people do not graduate and they do not, as a result, get good jobs. A lot of people, particularly women, will spend time out of the labour force child rearing, or people will have accidents and have bad luck and end up in poor jobs. The interest rate subsidy is there for protection. When you think HECS, you've got to think about insurance all the time. That's what it is. It insures you against bad luck. Once you put a real interest rate on that, that's gone. And the most inequitable part, and I think one that really needs attention, is that interest rate regime above and beyond the issues of price deregulation. Thank you.
No? Yes? Yeah. Well, let me take a slightly different view. Something about you can get 2 economists and 3 differences of opinion? 4. Right. I think the discussion on this is, I've heard others talk about this, people from the Grattan Institute, for instance, they come up with the view that because we've got the HECS system, it's not going to make much difference to people's choices. And Bruce is sort of putting a similar view there. I disagree. I think that for some courses, particularly the arts and humanities, special case, the rate of return, that is the return you get back compared to the cost, is very low indeed. In fact, we found out in our latest study that in fact it was only marginally worth doing. From an economic perspective. Now, you think you put that up by 30%, it definitely is not economic to study. Whereas, in fact, you can see for courses like commerce, I think if they just put the fees up by the required amount, it only adds about 1,500, I think, 2,000. And that's going to make a scrap of difference. So I do believe that relative prices are important and that people will actually start to make decisions of shifting from one course to another on the basis of the rates of return. And they'll also make choices between universities, which I think is a good thing. That I think it's all right for people to say fees are going to double or treble at places like Melbourne or ANU, but I don't think people are that stupid. that are going to go to ANU if the fees are twice as they are at the University of Canberra. So I think there will be a shift in resources to the benefit of some universities and to the detriment of others. And this is what this game's all about. Nobody really knows because we've never experienced it. We don't know exactly what these things are going to happen. It'll be an interesting experiment. I'm really looking forward to it.
All right. So we might go with some questions from the audience now. And can I ask that you keep your questions brief? They're not speeches. And we'll also ask the speakers to be concise as well, as we're fast chewing through this, and we want to get as many questions in as possible. So we might get the easiest one to reach with the microphone. So up here, so the blonde girl, yeah.
Hi,
Oh, sorry, and if you could also state your name and who your question is to.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
Hi, my name's Amy Constable, and my question is directed to Vice-Chancellor Ian Young and Senator Zed Seselja. Statements by the Vice-Chancellor suggested that deregulation will provide more scholarships to students from a low socioeconomic background. But the ANU website states that only students with ATARs of 90 or 95 are eligible for merit scholarships, and many equity scholarships rank eligible students according to their ATARs. In my hometown of Ballarat, Ballarat Secondary College had students receive an average subject score out of 50 of 23, with 1.7% of students receiving subject scores over 40. But at Ballarat and Clarendon College, the private school, the average subject score was 36, with 26% of students receiving over 40 for their subject scores, suggesting that a parent's income and their postcode is key to a higher ATAR. Deregulation of fees will see introduction of more ATAR-based scholarships that an overwhelming majority of low socioeconomic students will not be able to have any access to, and HECS debts may represent 3 or 4 years of their parents' disposable income. The Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne Uni today has described deregulation as a social experiment with low socioeconomic students. Can you clarify how deregulation will increase accessibility to institutions such as ANU and Group of 8 universities for students with low socioeconomic backgrounds?
With a HECS system in place, as designed by Bruce Chapman, one of the things that is clear is that there is no upfront cost at the point of delivery for a student to actually undertake a degree. But I'm sure, as everyone in this audience knows, there are real costs in being a student, simply your living costs every day of the week. And this is the real barrier, I believe, to low socioeconomic students entering university. And it's particularly the case at ANU, where such a large percentage of our students need to move away from home to go to university. So one of the things that I've argued for a very long period of time is that there should be some way of addressing those living costs. In the past, I've suggested that they should be able to be put on HECS. Governments have obviously not seen the wisdom of that particular suggestion for the obvious reasons. But if you can't do that, then my view is you need to do two things. You need to be able to provide funding for those students to be able to address those upfront costs. Now, there's a mechanism, as you say, in this package to be able to do that through scholarships, and I think that's something which is quite welcome. But there's another barrier to entry to this university and any other, and that's the social disadvantage that students have had over their life, the poor education that they may well have had, and therefore the low ATAR that they've got. Unfortunately, one of the results of the uncapped system we've seen is we've seen a depression of ATARs right across the sector. I don't think this is good for students who are relatively poorly prepared, maybe brilliantly gifted students, but are poorly prepared for university, and it's not a good thing for the universities themselves. How do you address that? You address that by providing pathways for those students. Right now, ANU has the highest median ATAR in Australia. What that means is those students are shut out from this university because there is no or very little way for them to actually enter. Again, I've argued for years that we should fund sub-degree pathways for those students to prepare them. This package actually, for the first time, actually provides Commonwealth funding to be able to do that, and it's through that mechanism, coupled with scholarships, that you'll address those low SES students and provide them a pathway to succeed in ANU.
And Senator Seselja.
I'll add a couple of things. One is where Professor Young left off in terms of the sub-degree pathways. It is actually very, very important. It's providing more opportunities for more people, and some of those will be taken up by people from lower socioeconomics and some won't, but certainly they will be an opportunity, as will degrees, as will the continued expansion of bachelor courses under this package. I think the point's been well made that the barriers, that in terms of barriers to entry, there is no upfront barrier in terms of tuition fees. Yes, the costs will come, but that is done through the HECS system. The UK experience shows that in fact there was an increase, a pretty sharp increase. As we saw deregulation, there was a pretty sharp increase in the number of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds accessing university. So I don't think the evidence, say from the UK, is that less people in those circumstances access it. I want to touch on another point that Professor Young made as well, and this is about the other barriers that are there now. I studied at ANU. I came from a relatively low income background. And for me, there was no, I was under the sort of HECS system, so there was no upfront barrier, as there won't be under the changes. But the biggest barrier, I think, to participation when you come from a lower socioeconomic background is the fact that you often have to work for a living during your time there as well. And that was certainly the case for me, and I know it's the case for many, many students, that you have to spend a lot of time earning a living to pay all of your bills, and you've got to fit in studies sometimes in between time. That's not always the ideal way to do university, but many of us go through that. The scholarships hopefully will provide for certainly many people less of a barrier there, and for regional students hopefully, and many of these things haven't been determined, and it will be in negotiation with universities, but for regional students who would find it hard to relocate because of the costs, the living costs of being at ANU or other universities, hopefully there'll be greater opportunities for them as well. So there are a number of aspects to it, but the important point to make is there will be no financial barrier for people to get into university under these changes. There will continue to be no upfront fees, and I think that's very important that we maintain that.
Can I just touch on one of those points you both made, or the main point, that HECS debt is not the true financial burden, is an enormous debt that some, including Professor Chapman, have estimated to be in 6 figures. Is that debt that might prohibit people from buying a house, say, or making large savings throughout their life? Is that not a financial debt, especially to low-income earners? So just to you two again, to Ian Young and Zed Seselja.
Let me have the first try. I mean, to come back to Stephen's challenge he threw out to me early on to actually fix the fee. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm sorry. I know. And for a couple of reasons, and the obvious one is I'm not actually sure what the environment is that I'm involved in just yet. But I actually did it publicly on Lateline. I had a shot at actually saying what I thought the maximum would be. And it comes back to a couple of the issues that Bruce made. Bruce joked the other day that he and I agree on all the really important things, including that the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening. Sorry, Bruce, to steal your joke. But I think that we do agree on a number of issues, including the fact that you do need a fee cap in a system like that, and that's what I tried to actually provide before. But I think the really important issue around a whole range of these issues is that I do believe that you can actually get a differentiation of fees. And the reason I actually believe that's the case is you just need to look at the postgraduate coursework market. Now, as it happens, 50% of ANU students already exist in a deregulated market. All our international students, plus our postgraduate coursework students, are all in a completely deregulated fee market. If I look at the market for postgraduate coursework students, Australian postgraduate coursework students, and you look at the typical fees that Australian universities charge, where they can charge there anything they like, almost no institution charges the same for its domestic students as it does for international students. On average, they're about 70% of the value. And indeed, the difference between the lowest and highest fees charged by Australian universities is usually a factor of 2 to 3. There is enormous range of values for the actual fee. So I do think that you'll get differentiation of fees and a range of different options. So I do think that there will be, now whether it's a market is another question, but there certainly will be differentiation of costs to students.
I think
Yep.
given the time, I probably won't add
Okay.
much to that answer, given others haven't had the opportunity.
And Cam Wilson had a quick comment on that.
Yeah, just two quick questions, Professor Young. Firstly, you said that, so you were talking about postgraduate prices. Do you know what the participation of low SES students are in postgraduate study?
No, I don't.
I think it's about 9.8%, which is much lower than the low SES means the lowest 25% of the population in terms of income. So, I mean, it's obviously not a very good representation of how low SES people will participate. The second thing is, with associate degrees, effectively what you're doing is you're charging people to come into university to do a degree, then to get into something else. Effectively, you're giving people who haven't been prepared and being let down by the system, and you're straddling them with more debt. What do you think about that?
The alternative is to throw them directly into university with low ATARs and set them up to fail. So my view is that, as I understand it, and I'm part of a working committee looking at this, one of the issues that needs to be actually set is, well, what's the fee regime that would exist for sub-degrees? That still needs to be determined yet. The fee levels, the amount that the Commonwealth would provide sub-degrees places is still yet to be set. I think you'll actually find, of all of the areas where there'll be the fiercest price competition, I believe it'll be that area there, because that's where private providers will really start to operate, and I think they will compete very aggressively on price. So it's quite likely, I suspect, that there will be providers for sub-degrees that will be charging, if not zero for the student contribution, something fairly close to it.
All right, we might get an audience question in now. So over in this area, Polly, you choose.
Thank you very much. My name's Jamie. I'm a third-year international relations student here. This question is mainly directed to Zed. So I voted for the first time in 2013, as I'm sure many other people did here. In 2016, my university repayments are going to more than double to 6%. The ALP, just in the period since I graduated high school, uncapped university places, which allowed me to come all the way from Perth to here. I'm sure allowed many other people in this room to get to university. And they instituted payments like relocation scholarships, which help people from places very far away from Canberra, like Perth. In less than a year since coming to government, your government has cut university funding. It's planning to double university repayments. It's also cut public service jobs, which for someone studying international relations like me, is not ideal. And given the higher chance I have to be unemployed because of this, I have now also found out that because I'm under 30, I will have to be unemployed for 6 months, living off nothing before I can access those benefits. How is this fair? And because of my double university contributions, how many billionaires can have a baby because of that?
There were a number of parts to that question. Shall I call it? And I'll try and address each of them. The first thing I think you touched on was you saying that the cost of repaying would double. Now I think we need to be clear on what we're talking about. What we have at the moment is indexation on CPI, which has been over the last decade or so somewhere between 2 and 3% on average. And what we'll have in the future under the changes would be the 10-year bond rate, the government bond rate. So that's the cost of government borrowing. So at the moment that's 3.7%. So that's what it is at the moment. It could go up, it could go down, but the government bond rate will be what sets it. It's unlikely for most of that time to be 6%, though that is the maximum that it could be. So even if the government bond rate were to drift above that, it wouldn't go above 6%. So it's very unlikely that through the time of paying off your degree, you'd be paying 6%. You'd probably be paying significantly less than that for most of your repayments. You touched on a number of other things. You sort of talked about the fact that the ALP had done certain things, and I'll touch on them because that is part of the issue, and both the well-intentioned things and the less well-intentioned things are part of the legacy we have to deal with. So the well-intentioned things, which we agree with, is things like expanding the number of places in universities. And we have seen that and we'll continue to see that. But there is a cost that comes to the taxpayer as a result of that. And so that's one of the things we need to grapple with and one of the things these reforms grapple with. But at the same time, we've also inherited a lot of debt. So we have to deal with that as well. So if we're going to talk about what the previous government did, one of the things is we've got a challenge to deal with that. You can agree with that or not, but the reality is we have large debts and deficits that we have to deal with. So part of what we're dealing with is finding a way to ensure that we continue to have access so that people from Perth like yourself in future will continue to be able to have the opportunity to come and study at the ANU or Sydney University or University of Canberra or any host of other institutions. But we will be asking that you make a greater contribution to the cost of that degree. The reality is that university graduates do very well on average. They do very well in the labour market. The unemployment rate is much lower than for others, and the amount that you would expect to earn is around about $1 million more than a Year 12 leaver. So what we're saying is we're going to be asking people who get the benefit of that to make a greater contribution, and that's what that reform's about. I could probably have a debate with you about some of the other issues, but given the time, I'll probably leave it there.
All right, I might get Senator Kate Lundy to respond to that.
Yeah, look, I want to go back to some of the earlier questions as well, because this so-called reform package is designing a problem that, trying to resolve a problem that they've created through the ideological nature of their change. And I mentioned Gonski earlier for a reason, and a lot of the challenges we're dealing with in supporting lower socio-economic students, like the statistics at Ballarat, were about improving our education system from the very beginning. Now, this government's walked away from those, and then they transfer that ideology into this higher education program that they have. And without that sub-degree element of it, what would it look like then? It would just look like the pure ideology that it is, to transfer the costs from the collective, from the state, from the taxpayers, and investing in an equitable system that has an ethical core, to a system where it is fundamentally free market and user pays. And that's what we as a party reject generally. So I think in all of the finessing and the detail that we're going into tonight, and it's extremely helpful to unpick the issues confronting us in this package, you have to remember that at the very heart of it, it is about an ideological shift in the way that we as a nation value and support public education. Public education, it's a principle we believe in, and I ask you to think deeply about that. What sort of Australia do you want to live in?
Thank you, Senator. All right, so time is flying, and I know at least one of our senators has to leave soon. So we'll go straight to another audience question. If we want to come down here, down the front.
So I guess this is a bit of a longer term question, but Zed has just touched on this, and the government has continually cited the need to generate savings and reduce national debt as the key reason for cutting spending to the higher education sector, which has ultimately led to the suggestion of deregulation. So I'm curious, how is it anticipated that this model will in fact decrease debt when we are maintaining a loan scheme but increasing the dollar value of each loan, increasing the interest rate of each loan, and decreasing the threshold to repay these loans? Studies have also shown that this scheme will ultimately result in a decreased ability for students to repay their loans and leave many bad debt marks on the government's record. So I ask two questions. One, how can such a policy actually achieve the government's goal of decreasing national debt? And two, will it almost inevitably mean that the inability for the government to manage this debt eventually lead to the privatisation of student loans in the long term?
I might actually go to Stephen Parker first on that one.
I don't know how it does that. I don't agree with it. I think there might be some different kinds of debts involved there. A national debt It's not necessarily the same thing as what the government owes. But I think it will lead to extraordinary long-term levels of debt amongst students and amongst graduates and so on. And I think that's a terrible thing, irrespective of how much the government actually owes.
And we might also ask Zed Seselja.
Sure. In terms of the second part of your question, no, I don't see any reason to go down that path. In terms of the first part of your question, how will it reduce debt? Well, obviously, when we're talking about government debt, by things like making a greater contribution, so having the cost of government borrowing as the indexation rather than inflation, obviously that brings some sustainability into the system in terms of the government's ability to fund these things. Remember also that the government is increasing the amount that we commit to higher education in the coming years. It goes from around 15 billion this year to around 18 billion in, I think, 2017. So we're continuing to make a contribution, but we're also asking that there be a greater contribution from many of those who benefit. Now, that also means that there is more money in the sector. That there is more money in the sector as a result of that. And, you know, Kate Lundy has sort of made out that it's just an ideological quest. But, you know, Andrew Leigh, when he was at the ANU as an economist, made this very argument about fee deregulation. I don't think he was coming at it from a liberal point of view. He was looking at it and saying that he believed fee deregulation was a good way to go, that there'd be strong price competition, that he said universities will have a strong incentive to compete on price. So any claim that this is sort of just some sort of, you know, liberal ideological quest, there are people on both sides of politics who have argued to put more sustainability in the system, and Andrew Leigh, the current Shadow Assistant Treasurer, is one of those, and he made some very, very good arguments that need to be considered.
Fergus, can I just add
Yep, sure.
I think the thing's important here. This is really why I favour deregulation. What the taxpayer pays and what the student or graduate pays is essentially a political decision. So governments need to make that decision. I don't, maybe the economists can help me, but I actually don't know how you logically determine the public and private benefits from that. So if government has actually made that decision, and you know, my personal view, as I said before, although I actually support the overall concept of this package, I'm worried about the magnitude of the cut to the Commonwealth Grant Scheme within this. So I've indicated that, and I've indicated that to the Minister. But if indeed you're going to do that, then there's a question of how do you do it? Do you do it the way they've done it in the UK, which is to actually set a fixed price cap? And we know that if you do that, what happens is everyone goes to that cap. And what that means is you end up with a higher education system very similar to what we've got now, which is that most of the institutions look very much the same. In my career, I've worked at 5 different universities in various roles. I've worked in a regional university, I've worked in a dual sector university, and I've worked in 3 GO8 universities. And people keep asking me, when I came to ANU, from Swinburne, people said, "Oh, how is ANU different?" And the reality is, it's different at the margins. But the DNA, the way the institution runs is essentially the same. And I actually think that's a disadvantage because we don't have a diversity of institutions. I would actually like to have an ANU that offers an education that you get at no other institution. Doesn't mean it's better than necessarily any other institution, but it's a different form of education to the ones that you will find at other universities. I believe you will only get that differentiation if indeed you have differentiation of price as well and an ability for institutions to be able to shape the future of their degrees. That's why I actually support deregulation.
Cam Wilson, do you have a response to that? Yes. It's okay to say no. All right.
No, I do.
You do?
So again, I mean, like one of the issues I raised in my speech is that this might be great for the ANU, questionable of that, and I kind of brought that up. But it will really create a class system in universities. We'll be seeing some universities who, through name value, in fact, they've made their name off taxpayer money, take advantage of what they have a monopoly over those high prestige brands, and in return, the rest of the universities that the rest of the population goes to, just like in the US, just don't cut the mustard. So, I mean, maybe there are some benefits, and I think we need more proof of that. But at the very least, that this is going to negatively affect, I think, the university system as a whole. All right.
our two senators are going to have to leave soon. I mean, they're very busy with estimates hearings, but we're going to try and push on with everyone else. So we'll go to another question. Okay. Well, we'll go to another question up the back. Polly, if you want to select a victim.
Hi, Mark Fabian. My question's for the Vice-Chancellors and maybe the economists as well. Quality has been mentioned as a really big issue in this, that we need to deregulate fees in order to ensure quality and therefore the international competitiveness of graduates. I was wondering if Vice-Chancellor Young in particular could go into some detail on what proposals he has to improve the quality of teaching at the university, not just the quality of our research output. And then in general for the VCs and the economists, whether there's anything that the Australian higher education system can do to ensure that teaching takes more of a central role in how we accredit universities and consider them to be of a high quality.
I've had too much of it, so I'm going to be short. I actually think that, and again I said this on national television, I actually think that a system like this is going to place significant pressure on institutions to be able to perform. The reality is right now there is actually very little pressure between institutions in terms of the quality of their teaching. I think in a system like this, where indeed students need to make a decision if they're going to pay X dollars here and Y dollars there, not only is it what they see as the employment outcomes at the end, I think they'll very much start to take a lot of notice of the quality of the education. So I think that there will be real onus on institutions to improve the quality of the education that they provide. I think you get that when you actually provide incentives for institutions to do that, whereas in the current system, the only incentive you've got is to be able to enrol as many students as you possibly can and push them into a lecture theatre. There is no incentive. In fact, there is a significant disincentive to actually take students and educate them in a small group because it financially is not to your advantage.
All right, Senator Seselja needs to head off, but he wants to make one quick statement.
Sorry, and I put my mic down, I apologise. I did want to just thank you tonight, and I apologise I have to leave, and I know Kate has to go pretty soon too, but I do put out the call. If people do have, any issues you want to discuss on this, I understand that there are a lot of concerns about it. I know many of you won't agree with the government's position on this, but I do genuinely want to engage with you and give as much information as I possibly can. So my office is there as much as we can possibly offer that. So please feel free to call the office or email the office with any legitimate questions you want to discuss. I'm happy to engage, and I thank you for the opportunity.
If that information is still in your head, I'd like to go to Stephen Parker. Yeah, have you got a response?
We already have a really high quality university system. There have been a number of studies ranking university systems around the world. In every one of them, Australia's been in the top 10 and sometimes in the top 5 compared to our relative size of economy, which I think might be 13th, 14th, 15th in the world. We have a really high quality system as it is. That's what's in jeopardy. But if the extra money is raised from students, do you seriously think it's going to go into teaching? It's going to go into research? And then going back to the very first question, these new scholarships are being funded by the fees of other students. So that it'll go into research, it'll go into scholarships for other students. I don't think one group of students should be paying for the access of another group of students. I think it's the government's responsibility.
We might go to another quick question. All right, so we will go to another quick question, and Senator Lundy will get a response, and then she'll have to head off. So we'll head over here, and yep, to the man in the maroon jacket.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Connor. You might have seen me around being pretty furious out the front of the Chancellery the other day. So I have a question for Vice-Chancellor Young, and Stephen Parker is invited to stick the knife in as well afterwards. Last week, the University of Western Sydney Council, on the same day in fact as the University Council meeting where they agreed to support fee deregulation, concerns notwithstanding, saw fit to freeze their university fees into the future, citing the need for certainty for current and future undergraduate students. the University of Western Sydney has a much higher proportion of its revenue derived from undergraduate places than the ANU. If the University of Western Sydney feels it can function without the extra revenue generated by charging higher fees for undergrads, why can the ANU not do the same, seeing as the effect on the ANU revenue stream-wise of not implementing fee increases will be much smaller? Do you think that the University Council and Chancellery at the University of Western Sydney are foolish for not implementing new fee increases? Is this proof that the undergrad fee increases at the ANU are designed not to address teaching quality but cross-subsidisation of research or the ANU's profligate expenditure on capital works? Or do you think that the University of Western Sydney simply needs less money because it's a university for proles?
Senator Lundy, do you have anything to say on that before we go to our others?
No, I'm okay.
Senator Lundy, the Labor Party had a very bad track record last year. I feel like you're getting it quite softly. If you'd like to make
Anything to say, Senator?
I'm quite interested in what Professor Young's going to say. Look, but seriously, on this issue, I think you need to go back to the principles that underpin it. You can pick it apart, and we did our level best to ensure that our university system did retain its credentials, that it was the most accessible, the most equitable. We did things that not all of you were happy with because there is no education utopia. But our principle is making sure that those university doors are open to everybody. That's been our focus. We don't apologise for that. We don't apologise for not keeping our universities at the, top 5 or 10% of ATAR results. We're proud of the fact that we made universities accessible, and I think what makes a country strong is its diversity. And if you start putting socio-economic constraints on those who have a university opportunity, you inhibit that incredibly, and it will take us backwards. It's not why we're a great nation. We're a great nation because people do have that opportunity. We are incredibly diverse, and we need to make sure that our the part of our population that does have a degree is as incredibly diverse as the rest of us.
All right, we'll go to Ian Young.
Let me come to the research issue, because in fact I think a couple of speakers have actually mentioned it before, and I think it's really critical to this. I've argued previously, and I've given public addresses on a couple of occasions now, where I've indicated one of the real policy flaws in the Australian education system, or the Australian higher education system, is we actually don't fund research properly. In fact, we're one of the very few systems I know of that actually uses cross-subsidies from support money which is actually provided to universities for student education, which is used to cross-subsidise research. This is something which I think is very bad. And in fact, I've argued previously that in fact people estimate, for instance, that it's 15 to 20% of funds which come for education is used for research. I've argued if that's the case, then what you should do is you should shave 15% off all of the contributions and actually distribute them on a research basis. Now, strangely enough, people said, of course you would say that because you're a Group of 8 university, but it comes directly to the issue that you're addressing. It's a flaw in our policy system. Having said that, one of the real advantages, I believe, in an ANU education, and one that we hope to build in the future, is that we should be able to, particularly in a new system, I hope, to be able to deliver on what we claim is a research-led education. And I think that's really important. I think today, more than ever, for graduates to be able to graduate from an undergraduate program and have the basic skills of a researcher, to be able to critique knowledge, to be able to discover new knowledge, are critically important today. These are the skills I think that people will more and more need. I believe you only develop those in a research environment. One of the reasons that I think it's important, in fact, to at least be able to educate people in an environment exactly like that, and one that I would actually like to build even more in the future.
All right, we might get one more question, and then that'll have to be it, unfortunately. So if we're trying to get in the very middle here. So yes, the man with the beard. Not that that's your defining feature.
Hi, I'm Marco, and I led the crowd to the Chancellery the other day. So the whole idea that the electorate is reflected by the two available sort of parties that we can choose from when it comes to the question of education is completely ludicrous because, I mean, all right, Kate Lundy, you might have said that, like, Labor cut money out of education, but really that was cutting out of, like, some increase that was already happening. But didn't Tony Abbott say exactly the same thing about pensions? And didn't you, or Bill Shorten, I think, like, attack him for using that sort of terminology? Ian Young, can you publicly promise that tutorials will be returned to the size they were before they were cut and that the School of Music will be put back to the way that it was before if, like, funding is deregulated here and if funding increases because of deregulation? All right. Ian Young.
Oh, Kate, you got off, did you? Oh, that's okay. No, I'm happy to do it. So two issues. First of all, School of Music. No, I'm most certainly not turning the School of Music back to what it was. I want the School of Music to be exactly what it is now. A school in the same tradition as the rest of ANU, which actually educates students in a research environment. That's what we've got now. And I think that's a very good thing. And in fact, if you actually talk to students who are entering the School of Music now, I believe they have exactly the same view. And I think that's critically important. The second issue which you raised was around tutorials. ANU right now, although lots of people within the institution are worried about the size of our tutorials, still has, I was going to say the smallest tutorials in the country. I can't guarantee that, but certainly from what I know, our tutorials are still remarkably small by national standards. It is a great shame, as I said before, that one of the legacies of 2 decades of decrease in dollars per student in real terms is that those sorts of things have gone up. We will only address that when we actually have a better funded system. I would like that to be better funded by the Commonwealth. However, after 2 decades of continual decline, I think I would be naive to think that it's suddenly going to change.
Stephen Parker, do you have something to say on that?
Not on the School of Music, I don't. I'm a lawyer. I taught law here at the ANU. I was the Associate Dean of Law here at the ANU. I believe in evidence. The evidence points to these changes leading to complete disaster for Australia, and there's no evidence that would point to it being a good thing for Australia. Look at the United States of America. President Obama is trying to get student debt levels down and college fee levels down, and he's having a hell of a job. Look at America and don't go there.
All right. And Senator Lundy?
Well, one of the issues, of course, is our investment in higher education. We're incredibly proud of the indexation system that we did put in place. And yes, we were prepared to trade off some of those increases, but reinvest them in Gonski and education. So I don't think you can hold up the two issues as side by side, because ours was redirecting it into an education system that would build it from the bottom up, which served our principles of improving equity and access to our higher education system, because it strengthened our whole education system. So I think when you look at the principle of the matter, our credentials still are far stronger, even though leading up to the last election, we did make that adjustment to our overall package of increases in funding to universities.
All right, I might try and round this off with a final statement from everyone. Bruce Chapman.
Just 2 points. One is down the track thing to avoid, and I made this as a kind of an ethical issue, is that the contributions from students don't exceed what the education costs. I think it's that Stephen Parker's getting. They already do. It is still, in some cases they might. I don't know about the detail on all of that, but I mean one of the things that there is agreement of is that it is an unreasonable thing for students to cross-subsidise research and other activities of universities, and as Steve and I think the Vice-Chancellor of ANU agrees with that, and Stephen Parker does too, this is a role for government. So if there's caution in interpreting where we're going, it is not to get to that point, which I think is kind of a moral issue. That really matters. In terms of the detail of the budget, one of the contributions, intended contributions of HECS was about equity, and that came down to the real interest rate regime, and that is, it was subsidised. And it was subsidised there for a very good reason, to not disadvantage the people who don't do well out of the system. That is a big issue in the contemporary debate.
Phil Lewis.
Yeah, something that doesn't seem to have been raised tonight, I might have missed it, is that there's always been regarded as two aspects of education. One is the return, the economic return to the individual, okay? And we can measure that quite well. But there's also the idea, rightly or wrongly, that education has benefits to society as a whole. So it increases productivity from a pure economic perspective, but it also provides a more knowledgeable, socially inclusive, politically aware society. And these are all things we think are worthwhile, and they're not going to go back to the student. The student shouldn't be expected to pay for all the externalities it gives the rest of the community. The community has to fund part of education. It really, if somebody wants to do something, the government really wants to do something, they'd actually finance some research to work out what the value of that is to society.
And Cam Wilson. Cam.
Oh, sure. So, I mean, universities are a place of learning, but also they're partaking in universities really contributes back to the community, as Phil said. I'm proud of ANU for the most part of how it is. I'm proud of Australia in that we have a system that's not perfect, but is better than a lot of other systems. I won't let these changes go without a fight, and students won't let these changes go without a fight.
All right. All right, well, we've pushed the speakers longer than they had intended to stay. They may never return. So, you know, one huge round of applause for all of our speakers tonight. Thanks.